Welcome to the Sci-Fi Ghost Channel, daily sci-fi stories. We invite you to subscribe and like, including a review with your honest opinion. Enjoy watching. The flickering blue light of the comm console washed over Jack Sharrow's face as he read the message for the third time. His brain refused to process it. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that didn't seem possible for a simple freight runner just trying to scrape by. By decree of the Crexian High Council, you are named legal guardian of Nithra Thrill and Kellis Thrill. In accordance with planetary law and the will of the deceased, you are obligated to uphold the provisions set forth. Failure to comply will result in nullification of inheritance, immediate eviction, and social banishment of the wards. Jack leaned back in his seat, staring at the screen. The message might as well have been in an alien language. Well, it was originally, but the universal translator hadn't botched anything. He even ran it through a second pass, just to be sure. The result was the same. Drob Thrill, his old war buddy, had named him the caretaker of his 2 teenage daughters. And somehow, the law of Crexis 4 translated that responsibility into a requirement that he, Jack Sharrow, an unassuming human pilot, marry them both. That can't be right, he muttered to himself. That can't be right. The ship's AI chirped politely. Mr. Sharrow, the document is confirmed as authentic. The Crexian High Council verified its legal status as part of the transmission. The decree stands. Jack rubbed his temples, hoping that physical pressure might squeeze some sense out of the situation. It didn't. So, you're telling me my old friend just died, and now I have to become some kind of alien polygamist to keep his kids from getting kicked off their homeworld? What the hell kind of law is that? The Crexian guardianship statutes are quite clear. A designated guardian may assume responsibility for dependent individuals. In cases where said dependents are approaching maturity, the guardian may be required to formalize that relationship to secure their legal and social standing. That's a polite way of saying I have to marry them, Jack snapped. The AI remained indifferent. It is the legal mechanism by which Crexian wards retain their citizenship and familial assets. Should you decline, the young ladies will lose their home and inheritance. Additionally, their reputation within Crexian society will suffer irreparable harm. Jack groaned. I'm just a pilot. I haul crates from one planet to another. I'm not a parent, much less a... He couldn't even say it. He closed his eyes and tried to think of Drob, to remember his friend's big, insectoid grin and his infectious laugh. They'd served together, fought together, even bled together during the Corvellan uprising. When the war was over, they'd gone their separate ways, but Drob had always kept in touch. Every year, Jack received a holo message, showing Drob's daughters growing taller, their shiny chitin glinting in the sun. He joked that Jack was their weird human uncle. Now Uncle Jack had become something else entirely. Jack leaned forward again, staring at the comm screen. Fine, he muttered. Plot a course for Crexis 4. I guess I'll just have to figure this out in person. The AI acknowledged the command, and the ship's engines hummed to life. Jack sat back, crossing his arms, as the stars outside his viewport elongated into streaks of light. Part of him hoped this was all some bizarre cultural misunderstanding. Another part wondered what he'd gotten himself into. All he knew for sure was that nothing in his life, his job, his friendships, his sanity... The first thing Jack noticed upon landing on Crexis 4 was the sky. It was a deep, burnished copper that seemed to hum faintly, as if the atmosphere itself held a constant low-frequency vibration. For most of the population, that was normal. Drob had explained it to him once, but for a human used to more muted skies, it felt almost disorienting. Jack's disorientation only grew as he stepped off the freighter ramp and into the ceremonial receiving area. The 2 young Crexians waiting for him were taller than he remembered, and their expressions were hard to read. Crexians didn't have eyebrows, but their body language spoke volumes, stiff postures, faintly twitching antennae, and subtle shifts of their segmented limbs. Nithra, the older sister by a few minutes, was as calm and composed as a ship's captain, while Kellis was practically vibrating with restrained energy. Uncle Jack, Nithra said in the oddly musical tone of her species. We're glad you came. Father always said you would keep your word. Jack winced. The weight of those words settled on him like an anchor. I'll do my best, he replied. Your Father was one of the best men, Crexians, I ever knew. I'm just sorry I wasn't here sooner. Kellis folded her arms, her claws clicking against her segmented elbows. You weren't supposed to be here at all, she muttered. This whole situation is ridiculous. We can take care of ourselves. Kellis, Nithra said sharply, her antennae angling toward her sister. Father entrusted us to him. We follow the law. End of discussion. Jack held up his hands. Look, I don't want to step on any toes here, claws, whatever. I know you're both perfectly capable. I'm not trying to change your lives or take over anything. I just want to make sure you're okay. And... He cleared his throat. Keep the council off your backs. Kellis rolled her eyes. Well, her equivalent of eye-rolling, which involved a flick of her antennae, and muttered something Jack couldn't quite catch. Nithra nodded curtly and gestured for him to follow. Come, we'll show you the house. You'll need to familiarize yourself with the property and with us. That is the way of things, Nithra said. Jack followed them up a winding path that led through a grove of trees, unlike anything on Earth. Their branches swayed in a synchronized rhythm, as though responding to an unseen conductor. He could hear the faint, resonant tones of their creaking, another Crexian normal that set Jack on edge. The house was impressive in its own alien way. Built into a rocky hillside, it had a sleek, organic look, as if it had grown naturally out of the land. Smooth, curving walls shimmered faintly in the coppery light, and the interior smelled faintly of an unfamiliar, citrus-like scent. Jack barely had time to marvel before Nithra and Kellis began pointing out key features. This is the engineering workshop, Nithra said, motioning to a room filled with tools, parts, and half-finished projects. We're continuing Father's work on the soil stabilizers and agricultural drones. You'll need to understand the systems if you're going to fulfill your role. Jack blinked. My role? What exactly do you need me to do? Nothing. Really? Kellis cut in. Except stand around and look ceremonial. We'll handle the real work. Kellis, Nithra admonished, though there was no heat in her voice. She turned to Jack. We mean no disrespect, but our father's work is important to the colony. His will named you as our guardian and husband. She hesitated on the word, her antennae dipping slightly. But it's clear this is a legal formality. You don't need to interfere, just follow the protocols, and everything will be fine. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, feeling more like an intruder than a guardian. Right, protocols, sure. I'll stay out of your way then. Nithra gave a polite nod, while Kellis muttered something under her breath and stalked off toward the workshop. Jack watched her go, then turned to Nithra. She's not thrilled about this, is she? She's young, Nithra said simply. We both understand the necessity, but that doesn't mean we have to like it. She'll come around. Jack wasn't so sure. As the days passed, he found himself trying to carve out a place in their lives, even if it was just a ceremonial. 1. He learned the basics of Crexian etiquette, how to greet visitors, how to signal respect with antenna angles, and how to properly sit at a shared meal without offending anyone. He also tried to help out in the workshop, though Nithra and Kellis usually waved him off. You're a pilot, not an engineer, Nithra said not unkindly. It's best if you focus on adapting to the culture. That's what we need most. Adapting was easier said than done. Jack attended local council meetings to understand the community's needs and joined in traditional Crexian celebrations, which involved rhythmic chanting and synchronized movements that left him hopelessly out of sync. The other colonists treated him politely, but he often caught them glancing at him with curiosity or pity. He wasn't sure which was worse. Still, over time, small victories emerged. Kellis began inviting him to her hovercraft races, which were as exhilarating as they were terrifying. He cheered her on from the sidelines, earning a flicker of something. That might have been a smile. Nithra started asking his opinion on minor projects, giving him a sense of inclusion. But the real breakthrough came late one evening. Jack found himself on the terrace, watching the Crexian moons rise. Nithra joined him, carrying a set of small, glowing data pads. I reviewed the council protocols, she said, handing one to him. There's no rule that says you have to be a passive figurehead. If you want to contribute more, you can. Jack glanced at the datapad, then back at her. "Are you saying you trust me?" Nithra's antennae twitched slightly. "I'm saying you're starting to earn it. Father trusted you, and that's good enough for me. For now." Jack let out a slow breath. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, he could make this strange new life work. Jack had finally begun to find his footing. The awkwardness of his arrival, the stiff silences at meals, and even the grueling lessons in Crexian etiquette were slowly giving way to something that felt almost comfortable. Nithra and Kellis still treated him as a guardian more than a husband, but the walls between them had started to come down. Jack was surprised to find himself actually enjoying his time on Crexis 4. Then the ultimatum arrived. It came in the form of a formal summons. A courier drone buzzed into the workshop, where Jack and Nithra were working on a finicky soil stabilizer. The drone deposited a sealed hollow disk on the table, its blinking light indicating a high-level council message. Nithra picked it up, her antennae flicking nervously as she examined the ornate emblem etched into the casing. "This isn't good," she murmured. Jack wiped his hands on a cloth and stood beside her. "What is it?" "It's from Thol Ixan." Nithra pressed a clawed finger to the disk's edge, activating the hologram. A life-size projection of Thol Ixan, the Crexian ambassador to the United Planetary Concord, shimmered into the air. His sleek, crimson exoskeleton gleamed under imaginary lights, and his voice carried the precise clipped tones of someone who was used to issuing orders. "Jack Sharrow," the ambassador began, "you stand at a unique intersection of human and Crexian relations. Your presence here, under the terms of our sacred marriage laws, has not gone unnoticed. Your position offers you a rare opportunity to guide public opinion and influence policy. Therefore, I am calling upon you to make a public declaration in favor of the Crexian High Council's proposed trade policies. This is not a request." Jack's brow furrowed. "I don't even know what those policies are." "You don't need to know," Ixan said coldly. "You simply need to stand before the tribunal, speak in favor of the Council's vision, and lend your unique status to their efforts. Refusal will have consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Jack asked, feeling the first stirrings of unease. Ixan's antennae twitched, the only sign of emotion in his otherwise rigid demeanor. "Should you decline, the Council will consider the legitimacy of your current arrangement null and void. Without the formal recognition of your guardianship marriage, your wards, Nithra and Kellis, will be stripped of their inheritance. Their home, their legal status, and their social standing will be forfeit." Jack clenched his fists. "You can't be serious. They haven't done anything wrong." "The law is clear," Ixan replied. "Their inheritance is tied to your role. If you refuse to support the Council, you are failing in that role. I will give you 3 days to consider. Do what is best for the future of Crexis 4. The hologram flickered and vanished, leaving Jack and Nithra staring at the empty space. Kellis appeared in the doorway, her antennae angled forward in alarm. "What was that about?" Jack turned to Nithra, who met his gaze with a troubled expression. "We have a problem," she said quietly. The next few days were tense. Jack spent hours poring over Crexian legal documents, trying to understand the Council's policies and their implications. He wasn't a politician, nor did he have the deep knowledge of Crexian society needed to navigate these waters. All he knew was that he couldn't let Nithra and Kellis lose everything over a political power play. Nithra and Kellis, to his surprise, rallied behind him. "We can't let them blackmail us," Kellis said, her voice steely. "It's exactly what Father would have fought against." "But the risk," Jack began, but Nithra cut him off. "We've faced worse. Father believed in you. We believe in you. If you're willing to stand up to them, we'll help you." Jack nodded, bolstered by their determination. The three of them began to devise a plan. Nithra, with her sharp mind and engineering expertise, unearthed records of questionable transactions linked to the ambassador. Kellis used her connections among the younger generation of Crexians to gather testimonies from other families who had faced similar coercion. Jack, meanwhile, focused on preparing his defense. He would need to stand before the tribunal and make a case not just for himself, but for Nithra and Kellis's right to their inheritance, and for their dignity. As the tribunal approached, Jack felt the pressure mounting. He knew this wasn't just about a political stance. It was about showing Nithra and Kellis that he was worthy of their trust. For the first time, he truly understood what Drob had seen in him. Not a perfect man, but a man who wouldn't back down when it mattered. The day of the tribunal arrived, and Jack walked into the chamber with Nithra and Kellis by his side. The council members, seated in a semicircle of elevated chairs, watched him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Thol Ixan stood at the center, his crimson exoskeleton gleaming, his antennae twitching slightly as he studied Jack. The proceedings began with formal statements and procedural rhetoric, but when Jack finally took the stand, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for Nithra and Kellis, for Drob's legacy, and for the idea that laws, however strange or alien, shouldn't be twisted into weapons of coercion. He outlined the evidence Nithra had uncovered, pointing to inconsistencies and unethical practices within the Council's trade policies. He spoke of his friendship with Drob and his promise to protect his daughters, and he argued as best he could that their future shouldn't be determined by political machinations. When he stepped down, the chamber was silent. Even Tholik San said nothing as the council deliberated. Hours later, the ruling came. The tribunal sided with Jack and his wards. The ambassador's ultimatum was struck down, and Nithra and Kellis's inheritance was secured. As the three of them walked out of the tribunal hall, Jack felt something shift between them. Nithra's calm demeanor seemed more relaxed, and Kellis no longer had the prickly edge that had marked their early interactions. "You did well," Nithra said. "Father would have been proud." Jack nodded, feeling a rare sense of accomplishment. "We did it together," he said. For the first time since arriving on Crexis 4, Jack felt like he wasn't just an outsider fulfilling a duty. He felt like part of a family. The weeks following the tribunal were filled with relief, but they were also marked by a growing sense of change. Jack had expected life to return to the uneasy routine it had been before the ambassador's ultimatum. But something was different. The strained dynamic between him, Nithra, and Kellis was no longer defined solely by duty or obligation. Instead, they began to function more like a true family, messy, complicated, and surprisingly warm. It started small. Nithra stopped treating Jack as if he were just a ceremonial figurehead. She included him in her engineering projects, asking for his input even when it wasn't strictly necessary. Jack, for his part, tried to learn more about the intricate Crexian machinery. He was no expert, but he found himself genuinely interested in the work that had meant so much to Drob. Nithra noticed, and her usual calm professionalism softened into something closer to camaraderie. Kellis, ever the rebel, continued her hovercraft racing with fierce determination. At first, Jack only watched, cheering her on from the sidelines. But one evening, Kellis shoved a second hovercraft helmet into his hands. "You're not just going to stand there, are you?" she said, antennae flicking with something that might have been amusement. "Let's see if you can keep up." Jack had never piloted a Crexian hovercraft before, and it showed. His first attempts were wobbly, bordering on disastrous, but Kellis, to his surprise, didn't mock him. Instead, she offered tips, showing him how to lean into the turns and read the subtle shifts in the craft's energy output. By the end of the day, Jack was still terrible at racing, but he was having fun, and Kellis seemed to enjoy their shared time on the track. For the first time since he'd arrived on Crexis 4, Jack didn't feel like an awkward outsider. He was still human, still clumsy in his attempts to fit in, but the sisters didn't seem to mind anymore. They'd begun to let him into their world in ways he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as the three of them sat on the terrace, watching the twin moons rise, Jack decided to address the unspoken question that had lingered since the beginning. "Look," he said, breaking the companionable silence, "I know the law says I'm supposed to be married to you both. But we all know that's not what this really is. I never wanted to impose anything on you, and I'm not going to start now. You two deserve to live your lives however you want." Nithra turned her head, her antennae angled thoughtfully. "You've already given us more than the law demanded," she said. You've stood up for us, protected what our father left behind, and respected our boundaries. That's more than enough. More than enough, Kellis echoed, though her tone was lighter. But if you start thinking you can beat me on the hovercraft track, we'll have words. Jack chuckled. I think I'll stick to cheering you on, thanks. The night air was cool and carried the faint hum of Crexus 4's coppery sky. For the first time, Jack felt completely at ease. Nithra and Kellis sat beside him, not as wards or obligations, but as something closer to equals. They weren't bound by the awkward legal framework that had brought them together. They were bound by trust, respect, and a shared sense of purpose. As the moons climbed higher, Jack looked at Nithra and Kellis, both so different, yet so united. He thought of Drob and his strange, unshakable faith that Jack could rise to the occasion. Jack didn't know if he'd fully earned that trust, but sitting here under the twin moons, surrounded by people who had grown to rely on him, and in turn let him rely on them, he thought maybe, just maybe, he was starting to understand what it meant to truly belong. Whatever challenges came next, Jack knew they'd face them together. A husband in name, a guardian by law, but more importantly, a family forged in fire.